Hello everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of the new Elizabeth Line Committee. I'd particularly like to welcome my fellow board members who have agreed to serve on the committee, also to Sarah Atkins, who joins us as a non-voting member, and to Catherine Cairns, who has been appointed by government and joins us as an observer today. I think Catherine can be with us until 2:15, and then I think Matt Lodge from DFT will be taking her place. Both Sarah and Catherine served on the previous Crossrail board, and so are very familiar with the project. And of course, my deputy chair, Anne McMeil, and Nelson Ogunshaking from the TfL board were also TfL appointed directors on the Crossrail board before its dissolution. So just to confirm that this meeting is being held using Teams and it's being webcast live on TfL's YouTube channel. So welcome to anyone listening in online. I should just say that there is some information that is contained in part 2 of the agenda today that relates to information to do with the programme partner incentive scheme and also to the project representative reports. We will be joined in part 2 by the project representative. We will try and have as much discussion as possible in the public part of the meeting, but of course if we're discussing commercially sensitive items, then that will need to be done in private. It is my intention, having had the part 2 discussion on the programme partner incentive scheme, to reopen the part 1 of this meeting and to come back and update on the views of the committee. Just before we move on to taking apologies and declarations of interest, I would just like to say that, of course, safety is absolutely paramount at TfL. We do have a safety item on the agenda today, and we will be bringing that up the agenda so that we give it the importance and the priority that it deserves. But I also just wanted to say, if you do have any safety related issues that you want to raise, either about Crossrail or any other matters, please do so with Howard Carter, our General Counsel, or raise any concerns you may have with an appropriate member of the executive. So I'm going to move on to apologies now. I think we have a full house, Howard, but perhaps you might confirm for me.
Yes, Chair, we do have a full house, except for Greg Clark, who is going to be joining the meeting at 1:30. I believe he has another diary constraint, so he may be leaving us before the end of the meeting, but he is going to join, so it's apologies for lateness rather than absence. Otherwise, okay. Everybody else is in attendance.
Lovely, thank you, Howard. And just moving on to item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Howard, over to you again.
Chair, thank you. So the declarations of interest for members of the TfL board are all declared on the TfL website, and as far as I'm aware, those declarations are all up to date. Obviously, that's not the case in relation to non-voting members or government representatives. So if there were any interests that were directly relevant to any item on the agenda, then it would be appropriate for them, as it would be for TfL board members, to declare those interests. However, I'm not aware that there are any interests that are relevant to items that are on the agenda.
Okay, thanks. I can see various people shaking their heads, so I don't think they do have anything that they want to declare at this stage. So perhaps if we move swiftly on to item 3, which just sets out the governance transition arrangements, it might be appropriate for me to say a few words before I hand over to Howard to introduce this item. On the 1st of October, responsibility for the Crossrail project moved to sit directly with TfL, and this was designed to ensure that there really is seamless decision making as we move into the final critical phases of the project. The governance transition arrangements were approved both by the TfL board under Chair's action and also by the Department for Transport. I would like to put on record at this first meeting of the new Elizabeth Line Committee my thanks to Tony Meggs, the previous chair of the Crossrail board, and to Nick Rainsford, who served as his deputy, for the huge amount of work that they did and their openness and transparency in the period between 2018 and 2020. I'd also just like to put on record my thanks to the staff of Crossrail, TfL and the Department for Transport, who have worked really well and collaboratively together in order to make sure that we've had an effective and efficient transition of the governance arrangements. So, Howard, would you like to say anything else at this stage on this item?
Jenna, perhaps I can just add my thanks to everybody who worked so collaboratively to get this done in an efficient manner. It really was a really good exercise and a demonstration of how to work effectively across a number of teams and organisations. So, like you, I'm also really grateful for all of that. The paper sets out in some detail, as did the Chair's action, how these governance arrangements work. I wasn't necessarily proposing to go through that in any detail unless you wanted me to. And if anybody has any questions about the arrangements, obviously I'd be very happy to take that. And we've been very clear to explain in particular how the transparency of decision making would work and how the continuity between the previous arrangements and these would work seamlessly in order to make sure that nothing impacts on the project, which obviously is the main issue. And we've also gone to some length, we'll probably hear in a minute a little bit more about that, to make sure that safety remains paramount and that the safety framework and the safety case for Crossrail absolutely is maintained through these governance arrangements. But that was all I was really intending to say by way of introduction.
Thank you, Howard. Do any committee members have any comments or questions on the terms of reference or anything set out in the report? I'm taking silence as assent. I think it is all set out quite clearly there. So can I ask committee members if we can just note the terms of reference and the arrangements as set out in the paper? Again, I will take, oh, Nelson's, I think, indicating assent. Is that right, Nelson?
Absolutely.
Lovely. Okay. In that case, then we'll take that as noted. And in a slight change to the agenda, I'm going to suggest now that we take the safety update as opposed to the project status update. I think I'm going to hand over to Mark and Andy.
May I just make a comment before we move on to safety? Yeah,
of course.
I just want to echo what was said by Howard Carter. For some of us who are members of the Crossrail board and moved across, in the way the whole process has been managed in a professional manner, I just want to acknowledge, and say thank you to both Crossrail team, the TfL team, and particularly the London Underground, and also to Mark Wild in the way the whole process has been managed. So thank you very much. I see this as the beginning of a new chapter, and we can move forward to take Elizabeth Line home. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. Well said. Okay, so the safety update, over to you, Mark.
I'm actually going to hand straight to Carol, but just 30 seconds from me. It is a new chapter, this, but we've got to recognise, I think, that Crossrail's had a 10-year construction programme with I can't do the maths, but 75,000 people have worked on Crossrail, and we've worked under something called our Target Zero Improvement Plan, which has been, I would say, recognised in the industry as a high-quality safety plan, kind of akin to what TfL have in their own zero harm sort of plan. So Carol and I have just come from the Shelt meeting today, actually. We've just had our half day every single period with our supply chain deep diving into safety. It authentically and genuinely remains our #1 mission that nobody gets hurt on Crossrail. And I know that Andy, the two Andys and Howard, want to take that forward as we go through into the commissioning of this railway. We're in a very, very complex position. but we're working hard to keep safe. So I am going to hand over to our Health, Safety, Quality Director and Environment Director, Carol Bardell-Wise, to give us the overview of safety. Carol, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And I appreciate the rejig of the agenda. Thank you. So I'm Carol Bardell-Wise. I'm the Health and Safety, Quality and Environment Director for Crossrail. I'm going to provide an overview of our performance and take any questions alongside Mark shortly. And the key aspects that I will cover are what has happened in the past periods, what has been our response, and then look to the future opportunities and our interventions. So coming to performance, performance is generally stable, but we have recognised the need for improvement and have been addressing this with our supply chain and our partners. So we've seen an increase in slips and trips on site, and this has resulted in ankle injuries and sprains. We had a piece of equipment fall from height and strike a person in an exclusion zone, so we took that extremely seriously. And when we delve into the trends, the causes of the incidents are not adequately following procedures. We had doors left unlocked into rooms and not following the designated routes on site. We've also picked up the emergence of electrical incidents and near misses. So all accidents, incidents and near misses are obviously investigated by our supply chain with support from our client team. And the learning that emerges for the programme in terms of taking action and intervention is brought to SHELT, as Mark mentioned. So SHELT is our Safety and Health Executive Leadership Team. It is made up of Crossrail stakeholders, so Network Rail, London Underground, and then the contract leaders and managing directors of our supply chain. So the learning comes to that forum, and we talk openly and transparently and honestly about what is to be learned and what we can do to intervene. The other avenue where we share learning is our learning forum, and this is our construction and project leaders coming together to do similar, to take that learning back into the project. So this then leads me on to the second point, to highlight some of our targeted response based on the trends and insights that we have. So we've prioritised a focus and review around working at height and the working at height practices across the programme, electrical safety, and checking the working methods and risk assessments. So you would probably call on that to be somewhat of a back to basics campaign. Something we did specifically do, we brought together our electrical experts, so our senior authorised persons, to participate in an electrical summit, and we designed improvements based on the learning from the incidents we had. And then our contractors themselves have actually responded with specific back to basics campaigns for their sites, and I call out the initiative that really was led by the Whitechapel team. We have rolled out improvement campaigns from SHELT, and we've conducted actually over 42 senior leadership site safety engagement visits since July, under strict control around what's been required in terms of COVID response and strategy for resilience. And we've also now managed to remobilise our frontline leadership programme with the supervisors. So this has recently been relaunched at our Bond Street project to great success. And this is a way to bring together the frontline supervisors to talk about safety culture and their leadership intervention on the project level. So finally from me, before I take questions, looking to the future, what are we focusing on for the coming periods? Well, first, it would be remiss of me not to talk of COVID, and that is about maintaining our resilience with a firm understanding of our prioritisations in order to keep people safe and to protect the programme delivery. Our gold, silver, bronze response and cadence is working effectively, and we are fully aligned within TfL set. So COVID is a priority going forward. We do not want to see any complacency around all of the measures that our supply chain have been exemplar in implementing. And then the second greatest priority, if you can have two great priorities, is the focus and emphasis in preparation for trial running. So our suppliers have recently completed self-assessment readiness arrangements for trial running. We're working with them to ensure campaigns for the countdown to the change in rules as we step into trial running is well managed, well understood, and communicated across the entirety of the programme. We do recognise this is a seismic change, and we will be doing everything to ensure the safety culture is aligned to ensure we can transition into trial running safely. We've got dedicated resources to ensure all parties are prepared and that all risks are mitigated, and will prove we are ready to safely start trial running. We are drawing on our railway culture in existence today through our learning in dynamic testing to take that forward and draw on the safety leadership we have, and especially through our SHELP and the stakeholders and members of that leadership team. So that was the position I wanted to share today, and then invite questions for myself or Mark or any other persons, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That was really clear and really helpful to understand what you're doing across the project. Perhaps I could invite comments and questions from my fellow committee members now. Perhaps I should have said at the beginning of the meeting, we'll use the normal hand function to indicate people's desire to speak. I think I saw Anne's hand go up first and then Nelson. So Anne, first of all.
Okay, thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Carol. Really, really helpful. Could you maybe say a little bit more about the constraints or issues around COVID actually on site, and have we had any COVID incidents on site, or have we managed to contain it? And also, in terms of leadership, previously, this is probably not for you, Carol, but more for Heidi. Previously, board members actually sponsored particular stations, which actually gave a sort of presence and safety leadership link into those stations. I know it's all been a bit difficult with lockdowns and everything else, but as a committee, I do wonder whether it might be helpful if members were able to do it, whether we actually linked up to stations to actually get that link in, and to actually work with Carol in terms of providing that sort of safety leadership in those areas. And I think you probably are going to say something about the SHELP meeting in that previously the chair of the board actually sat on that. So I think again that in terms of leadership is really good for a board member, a committee member to be involved in that would be really helpful. Thank you. Thanks,
Anne. Yeah, Anne sort of previewed actually something that I was going to say once other people have had a chance to comment. So Anne and I have discussed the fact that under the previous Crossrail board arrangements, I know that Tony Meggs and Nick Rainsford often attended the SHOUT meetings, and it might be helpful for people to know that I had a discussion with Mark Phillips in recent weeks about whether he would take on a role with respect to the Elizabeth Line Committee, where he takes a particular interest in safety, gets to know the team, perhaps attends some of the Elizabeth Line delivery group meetings on occasions, just to make sure that we've got someone on this committee that is really plugged in to the safety agenda. We'll all take an obvious interest in it, but unless I think Mark Phillips is on the call. When Mark and I spoke, I can't remember exactly when it was, he indicated to me that he was happy to do that, and I'd put various people in touch, and so I think that would be a useful thing going forward. And if other committee members are agreeable, I do think it would be sensible, as Anne suggests, to allocate stations, just so that when we're not in a social distancing world, we can actually go and visit, talk to people on the ground at the coalface, actually get a real physical sense for ourselves about how things are going, and just talk to people about the programme generally, but safety in particular. And so if other committee members are agreeable to that, I think that's a really good suggestion, and I can see people nodding heads and putting thumbs up. So I think we'll proceed in that way. Perhaps I'll come back to Carol to answer Anne's really important question about COVID and incidents of COVID and how we're managing that. Carol.
Yeah, thank you. So we have had instances of positive COVID cases and as well had people in self-isolation. So the supply chain, the tier 1 community and principal contractors and the tier 2 and 3 supply chain all have response plans. So have arrangements that we did actually request were tested before any instances of positive cases had struck us, if that's the way to describe it. So we have the track and trace in supplement of the NHS. We also have a lot of measures that all the supply chain have brought, sort of some of the world-class measures, a lot of temperature checking, testing, track and trace comparable with NHS. So whilst we've had cases and people in self-isolation, I would probably like to make sure you understand that those response plans are rapid and robust, and we are doing everything necessary to protect people. We understand where the pinch points might be. We understand how people are, for example, travelling to and from our project locations. We have resilience plans around ensuring there's deputies for people, and we even have arrangements where shifts never meet. There's no face-to-face, socially distanced, of course, opportunity for teams to meet. So we've done an extensive amount of work in the bronze command, silver, and helpfully making decisions in gold with this connectivity as well within the TfL set. So in response, yes, we have had cases, and we are confident the arrangements and plans we have are doing everything to mitigate any contribution to the spread of COVID.
Thank you.
Could I just add, Carol,
Yeah.
that Andy Byford helpfully has sought some very expert help for us in our stations world leadership. It's enabled us to move Mark Cooper to be our silver commander, uniquely and discreetly focused on COVID. And we all know Mark's attributes are probably really suited to that. And just to reinforce what Carol said there, we have our gold command since the 23rd of March hasn't stopped, and we've kept going all the way through. As of today, we have 33 people with infections and 46 people isolated, and we track it every single day. And it's a moving target. Our most important risk that we're measuring at the moment is people who are in proximity of travelling together. And we're even down to the detail of planning people's routes so they don't have alternate means that they never meet until they get there. So I think we're doing as best we possibly can, and putting Mark Cooper specifically into Silver Commander, I think, is further strengthening us. But we don't know what we don't know, but at the moment it is contained and not in any way damaging our productivity.
Thanks, Mark. Nelson and then Mark Phillips. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I was going to ask a question to do with COVID going through the second wave, because we thought this may come around and we need to prepare for it. But I think, in the usual Carol's way, she's sort of giving us a very detailed plan of what is being done, which is very, very good. I'm encouraged about that. One point I was going to raise, maybe I'm out of touch, but is it a case that we are planning a second blockade? And if we are, what are the health and safety aspect of that, particularly with Carol talking about getting ready for trial running process? Have we put some real thought into that? I'm sure you have. Carol?
I might take Mark's question as well and then ask Carol and Mark to deal with both of them. Mark Phillips.
Thank you, Heidi. It sort of comes on, I think, after Nelson's question, and it's perhaps not a direct question and more a suggestion of what we might like to have next time. And it's how do we look around the corner? So the risk that we need to be preparing for now is merging operational staff from MTR with the trial running, and you're going to get increasingly project people working with operating and station people. And I think it's managing the risk at the interfaces. And I think it would be really helpful for us just to understand how the assurance processes developing around managing those new risks, as opposed to just the project construction risks that you've been dealing with so far? Thank you.
Mark, who wants to go first, you or Carol?
If I maybe
I talk about I'll go for the blockade, and then Carol, you do the risks. Is that
sure?
So actually,
Agree.
You'll hear in my update the second blockade, the sweep up blockade, is actually happening right now. We're day 6 of an 11-day blockade now, and actually our productivity is 92%. So I think we have demonstrated that we are adequately managing COVID. I hesitate to say we've nailed it, because this is a forever changing picture, but we have the right structure, I think, and the current blockade demonstrates that our productivity is resilient. Carol, you're better than me, because I know we've done a lot of work on the next risks. Over to you.
Yeah, so if I take the question in the context of COVID first, and then more broadly, the look around the corner, I think we have Gold Command, and I'm able to take an inquiry into there. So what I'm going to probably suggest is I go there, and then we think about the way in which we might instruct through Silver and our Bronze working group team to consider the people interface between operational staff and our traditional construction staff. So that's sort of the COVID piece. More broadly, addressing the safety interface risk between the railway and the stations, that has never been off the agenda, is more prevalent and on the agenda now. So I'll probably take an action, if Mark might agree, Mark Phillips, to consider the way in which we could visualise and bring that here to be relevant and insightful for the committee.
I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Andy Byford and Andy Lord. So Andy B first.
And actually, it's Andy Lord's going to make the comment. So over to you, Andy.
No problem.
We're in the same room, Heidi. Apologies. Just trying to manage the technology between us. I was just going to comment, if I may, on Mark's point. I think it's a really great one. But I think, just to offer support to Carol there, obviously we do this a lot in TfL already, because obviously we have the Major Programmes Directorate who are delivering major construction, Northern Line extension and bank blockade being two of the most obvious ones, where we're having to manage the interface with the operational railway almost on a daily basis, as well as routine renewals that we do on the rest of the network. So we're very linked up, as you know, now at a safety perspective and through COVID in particular. So we've got a lot of experience that we can share with Carol and her team to make sure that we take the best practice forward.
Thanks, Andy. OK, I think we might have done on this issue now. Thank you, Carol, for a really comprehensive presentation. I think we will note the safety update if committee members agree, and move back to taking item 4, which was the status update. And I'm going to ask Andy Byford if he would like to introduce this item.
Thank you, Heidi. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Generally, Heidi, I'm not going to say too much in these meetings, because the really important people you need to hear from are Mark for the project and Andy for operational readiness. But because this is the first meeting, I'll just make a few introductory comments, if I may. So the first one would be just to echo where you rightly open, which is to thank Tony Meggs and the CRL board, who, let's just remember, picked up the project in a bit of a problematic state, to say the least, a real woeful position in many ways in 2018, and I think did a really good job of arresting most of the issues and in getting it back into a controlled state, such that certainly when I came on board, I was very keen to take it on. But very grateful to Tony Meggs for the fact that he's got us, if not to the home straight, onto the final curve of this project. So I see my role as now being ultimately accountable for Crossrail, and it's something we sought, but it's the right thing to do. We need to have a single controlling mind, because that way then there is absolute clarity of accountability, and there's absolute clarity on direction and a single point for you, the ELC, ultimately to come to. And this is the key point, to liberate Mark to focus on getting Crossrail finished, Andy to get it the Elizabeth line operational ready. So what I said to those two guys is I'll be the blocker, if you like. I'll deal with the politics, the admin, all the noise that goes around the project. My job really is to be an enabler to those two, to enable them and the wonderful Crossrail team and the LUL teams to shine. So just reminding ourselves of what we inherited though from Crossrail. The last act of the CRL board was to do a much more detailed view of schedule and cost. And if you recall, the schedule on the most likely scenario is that phase 3, in other words, the central section from Paddington through to Liverpool Street will open in the first half of 2022. That the phases 4 and 5 connecting the East End, the West End for through running for Shenfield through to Heathrow and through to Reading would then follow. Effectively, ultimately completing a year later, so the beginning first half of 2023. And the additional budget, because of that additional slippage, is an additional £1.1 billion. So what I've said to the team is, and this is public knowledge, is that we will commit, ultimately you can hold me accountable, but we will commit to no further slippage on that CRL identified schedule, no further slippage, and no further recourse to public funds over and above what's been identified. But you would expect this, I hope, I'm sure. I've challenged the team. We set ourselves a challenge of safely improving on both, safely improving on schedule and safely improving on budget. But the key word is safely. Yes, we want to push on and see if we can improve upon that schedule and improve upon that budget outturn, but not at any cost. Safety absolutely comes first. So that's point number one of just only a couple I wanted to make. We're leaving nothing to chance. And because the project still has a lot of challenges, it's in good shape physically. The stations, one of them already has been brought to substantial completion 3, SC3, namely Farringdon. There's still a lot of complexity in terms of bringing together what is the world's first digital railway and you know, basically getting it all linked up and getting it ready to go. There's a lot to do in terms of safety assurance, systems integration, etc., etc. And a couple of the stations are lagging behind. So again, we're leaving nothing to chance. We've brought in a couple of people with whom I worked in North America. One is a stations completion expert. His mandate is to get the two laggards, namely Bond Street and Whitechapel, up to speed, because our view is open means open. We want the whole thing open in the earliest possible opportunity. The second additional resource we've brought in, again, will be a direct report to Mark. The stations guy reports to Jim Crawford, but the second person is someone who is extremely good at overseeing project controls, very good at coordinating myriad activities within a project, and very good at keeping the eye on the prize. What's the end game, and how do we make sure that we achieve the glide path to getting it open in the earliest possible time? So those two resources are here. They're up and running. They're already adding value. Then the next thing, we've already set up this subcommittee to this committee. We've set up the Elizabeth Line Delivery Group, which is the body that I chair. It is very much an activity-based, action-oriented meeting. We've had 2 sessions so far. The first one was a bit of a wash-up from dealing with stuff that we inherited from the Crossrail board. The second one got things underway. It's my intention that the minutes from that meeting will be available to the public. There's no secrets. It's an action-oriented meeting. There's an actions log that's maintained, and we're also intending to provide an overall project summary, in addition to Mark's project report, an overall scorecard, such that you, the members of the ELC, and the wider general public and the media, can see at a glance what the project looks like, as a foil, if you like, to what the independent project representative is saying, because they'll have a view. You should also see what our view is. So we will have that ready for the next of these meetings. So that's all underway. In addition, there's also what we call a weekly countdown meeting, which is, as the name suggests, every week. And it literally is a forum whereby we check, again, leaving nothing to chance. Are we on track for systems integration dynamic testing? Are we on track for trial running? Are we on track for trial ops? It's Mark and Andy's opportunity to say, I've got a bit of a problem here, need some resource, need something unblocked, for them to ask for help or direction, and also for us in the round to make sure that we're on track, and that if we need some more resource, we'll just go and get it. because we're leaving nothing to chance. We want this thing done. And I think really that's all I wanted to say. This is one of my top 2 priorities as Commissioner, the other being obviously to lead TfL through and beyond COVID. We are determined to deliver the Elizabeth line in the earliest, cheapest but safe outcome. So that's our task. And with that, I'm going to ask Mark to first up talk about the project status, and then we'll move on to Andy and the operational preparedness. Thank you. Mark.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. And certainly from my point of view, I would thank Tony and Nick as well, and all the ex-CRL board who did just a super job, and I couldn't have got to where we are without them. But it is a new chapter, and this is just fantastic to be in this governance structure, working for Andy back in TfL and alongside Andy Lord and Howard as peers and colleagues again is just fantastic, and will be the catalytic event, I think, that'll get this railway over the line. Just 5 minutes from me, then I'll give you, there is a paper, I'll give you a contemporaneous update of exactly where the programme is today. Our programme's called something called DCS for new readers, the Delivery Control Schedule. It's version 1.1. We have actually achieved a baseline of 1.1 DCS from our point of view. It is assured by our Lot 2, and I'm sure PREP have got a view on it as well. There are some open issues in our assurance, I'm sure Rachel could pick up, but we do now have an assured baseline DCS 1.0. I've been on this project since 2016 as a non-executive, and then in this chair for a couple of years. We've never had better schedule compliance, actually, than the past 2 or 3 periods. Probably since the tunnel drives of 2012, 2013, which were highly productive for Crossrail, have we seen it. Now, of course, we're in an immensely complex environment. The challenge ahead is great, but I'm very pleased to report that our DCS is holding, albeit it is immensely challenging, the most challenging thing any of us have ever done, but the DCS is holding, unlike previous DCS attempts, even on the revised governance structure under my watch, we're doing better. And our productivity levels, the Crossrail board previously were very interested in our productivity level. We measure it every period, project by project, and our productivity levels now are in the low 60%. It doesn't sound dramatic, but when we took over this project, it was 20%, and we really struggled to get it much more than 30% productivity. We've now got productivities typically in the low 60%. We need to drive that harder. Really grateful for Andy to introduce some specialist resources to us to help get that over the line. It's never going to be 100% in an immensely complex system integration project like this, but it is heartening to see our productivity improving. The main reason for that is the adoption of a blockade mentality, not just in the central operating section, but also in the stations. And I'm sure people will have questions on that. So to the programme, our current risk-adjusted programme remains unchanged in DCS 1.1, which is an opening window of the first half of 2022. Of course, our target is to get on the leading edge of that, or indeed, if we could improve on that. But at the moment, if you put our risk assessment in, it is presently unchanged, albeit we have positive indications that that can be improved, and I would kind of leave it at that. There are 2 critical paths on this project. The first is a significant drive to something called trial running, at which point the railway, the actual end-to-end railway from Abbeywood to Paddington, literally becomes a railway. It becomes the auspices of Andy Lord and Howard Smith, and we work collectively and collaboratively in and around that railway. It's the pivotal moment of this programme, because we all know from that point on, things become easier, difficult and challenging, but easier to do, and we can see the end is definitely in sight. At the moment, the earliest we could achieve that is the end of March next year, and that is where we will drive towards. But clearly, we have an element of uncertainty, and not too much actually. It's not too far out from that, but our objective is to get as close on that front edge as we possibly can, and that, of course, is a matter of weeks away. Reasons for optimism, since maybe the Crossrail board members have looked at this in some detail, we're presently enacting all of our stations to something called SC1. All of our stations are at SC1 configuration, and we are enacting that configuration. That allows all of our stations to be used for evacuation route. That will be complete by the 8th of January. All the shafts and portals, which were a real challenge for this programme, you go back 6 months, we were in a lot of difficulty commissioning the 10 shafts and portals, these very large engineering vertical structures that connect the tunnels to the surface. Through massive collaborative work with RFL, London Underground and Crossrail colleagues, we will have them all handed over by the 16th of December, which is only 3 weeks away. And handed over means done, actually, in Howard's hands and properly done. So thank you to everybody doing that. We are in the middle of our second blockade, as I mentioned before, Nelson. Good productivity. That will go till Monday next week, and it'll really finish the routeway to be ready for trial running. It's the sweep-up blockade, that the work that we couldn't get done in the summer, or there was some test results, notably some significant work at Bond Street to build hermetically sealed end walls, which sounds easy to do, but it's quite a mammoth job at Bond Street to seal the trace, and that's another milestone for Bond Street to achieve. Probably the most significant things for us are the next week we will enter something called System Integration Dynamic Test. Very long an acronym, SIDT. What does that mean? Well, it means that we will have 8 trains in the central operating section for the first time. 8 trains are sufficient to start to pressure test the system and start to really prepare for trial running. It's a pre-trial running phase, and that will commence next Wednesday. Notable as well because RFL colleagues get the opportunity to be in the control seat, properly supervised and safe, of course, but a big breakthrough for some really tremendous people in RFL who've waited patiently for this moment, and huge collaborative effort, I'm sure Howard would agree, to get to that point. And finally, on the critical path to trial running, we have achieved all of our safety justifications for the central operating section. These complex safety assurance documents are endorsed by our safety authority. That certainly doesn't mean to say it's done, because there is now a very detailed process to go through with the operator, RFL particularly, making sure that the Crossrail safety case syncs carefully with the operators. And that is a very sensitive matter, high intensity, and certainly myself, Andy Lord, Howard, Jim, we're working very closely on that. And that is why we can't actually give a date for when trial running will occur, because it's a safety critical matter that needs to be handled carefully. But we are doing well, and we have a positive momentum. And certainly by the time we meet again in this committee, we will know with certainty when trial running will occur. I'm sure about that. The second critical path for me is the hooking up of the stations and the reliability growth once we are in trial running. So if you go to the summer of next year, we will be in trial running. I'm very confident about that. What will be the battleground then? Well, the battleground will be stations. And Andy Byford mentioned bringing a station specialist in to help us, which is very, very useful. Farringdon has achieved its SC3, which means completion of supply chain work. Really positive milestone that was achieved 4 weeks ago, and Paddington will get to its SC3 in about 3 weeks' time. Huge effort going on there. And that's important because Farringdon has just commenced a 12-week countdown process to actually integrate it and hook it up. All this complex SCADA commissioning that we've talked about for years is actually happening now at Farringdon. That's important because next year we'll need to do 8 of them. And the SCADA commissioning of the Elizabeth Line, the world's first truly digital large-scale railway, is one of our most significant risks ahead. How fast can we hook up the stations? And again, we need to see how Farringdon going. It's going pretty well at the moment, but it's only week 1 of 12. And again, by Christmas, we need to know what our beat rate is, what the productivity rate is of commissioning Farringdon. And that will be the determinant of learning how we can improve it, speed it up, and get the rest of the stations commissioned. And the very final thing for next summer is this very complex process of Siemens and Bombardier improving the reliability of the core software systems. It's a great positive that we are entering System Integration Dynamic Test next week. That means our systems are safe, the transitions work, this immensely complex 10-year actual activity of making the safety of the transitions work, this complex 3 signaling systems together. We've kind of conquered that. The battle ahead of us is to improve the system reliability, which is a large task with Siemens and Bombardier need to be fully engaged in. We are connected right at the top levels of their organizations, full engagement from those organizations, but it's fair to say the process of reliability growth now is going to be the main determinant of opening this railway in 2021, alongside the commissioning of the stations. So generally, very, very positive progress on Crossrail, but a huge challenge ahead, but we're in a good position. I don't know if you want questions now, Heidi, or should I pass straight to Andy Lord? What would you prefer?
I think if we perhaps hear briefly from Andy L, and then we'll take questions and comments after that. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Mark, and afternoon, everybody. So just, I'm sure as the committee knows, so my responsibility here is around ensuring that we're ready to operate the railway when it's handed over from Crossrail. I become legally accountable for the safe operation of the railway and once trial running starts, and then obviously into revenue service. So Mark's role is to hand over that railway to me, that asset to me, in a sufficiently assured and certified and safe manner, and that's our focus, and we're working extremely collaboratively to do that. And as Mark said, there's been some real progress on that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I thought first off it's just worth touching on, and I know the committee will have received and read the paper, but just worth touching on the fact that we often forget that we're actually already operating the railway in two halves under the TfL rail banner. Westbound services out of Paddington to Heathrow and Reading, and eastbound out of Liverpool Street to Shenfield. And the railway is performing extremely well, working with our partners MTR and Bombardier. The railway is regularly achieving more than 96% on the national rail metric, which puts it regularly in the top 5 and often in the top 3 of all train operating companies on the network, which I think is a real credit to the teams involved, Howard Smith in my team and Steve Murphy and the team at MTR. And in fact, last Saturday, TfL Rail achieved 100%, which is a very rare feat, as I understand it, across the national rail network, and that's huge credit to everybody involved. In effect, it's 2 separate railways, and to achieve that is real credit, and also great support from our colleagues at Network Rail. As Mark's touched on, reliability is key. Obviously, at the moment, the 2 parts of the network we're operating on are Network Rail infrastructure, and they're shared with other TOCs, including freight operators, particularly out to the east, and that is often what is impacting our performance. But nonetheless, train reliability is a focus for us. Although it's pretty invisible to our customers at the moment, the trains are not yet at the level of reliability that we want to see when we're in full Elizabeth line running, and that is a real focus. We've now instigated a 4-weekly meeting with Bombardier, with their group CEO, and we've got real active support from Bombardier, and seeing some real progress on that. We've got 2 critical software drops due, one in December and one at the end of January, which we all believe will make a significant improvement to some of the reliability issues we're seeing linked to the train operating system. And when I say those reliability issues, these are often issues that only last a minute or 2, but a minute or 2 in a high frequency railway is obviously very significant on the service and the frequency we operate today. It's not impactful at all. So good progress being made there, and a real focus with our colleagues in Bombardier, and equally linking in with Siemens, who are obviously going to be or provide the signalling technology in the central operating section. So we've actually got a senior level meeting with them next week. Whilst talking about Network Rail, they are making real progress on some of the infrastructure upgrades for both the west side and the east side. There's significant steelworks being installed at both Ealing Broadway and Ilford stations, which will transform the passenger experience at those stations, as well as deliver step-free access, which is a critical part of the programme. And having visited a number of stations, particularly at the east end of the railway, the station ambience and the measures that have been put in place there have really made a huge difference to stations that really have had decades of underinvestment, and will really improve the passenger experience, which is great to see. From a infrastructure readiness perspective, as Mark has said, we've already taken all but 2 of the portals and shafts over, so they now sit under RFL responsibility for the care and maintenance, and with 2 more due to be handed over before Christmas, and that will be a real milestone, as Mark says. So we're now responsible for the engineering and asset maintenance of those, and that was a key achievement. As Mark rightly said a few months ago, they were really on the critical path. Big focus, as Marcus said, around making sure that we now get our side of the assurance process approved. Crossrail have to safety justify their assets. We then have to turn those into an operational safety process and documentation. That work is underway. There is a huge amount of it, some of which is obviously come to us later than originally intended, but we're doing what we can to throw additional resource at that. And we're transferring some additional engineering resource from TfL Engineering in to help with that process. But the focus obviously will be to ensure that we absolutely maintain safety, and we won't do anything to compromise that. And if that means that we have to take a very small delay in terms of any handover dates, that's exactly what we'll do. But at the moment, we're not planning to do that. We're also identifying what we're calling an alternative delivery method or model for any items, particularly in stations that are not critical for trial running, may not even be critical for trial operations or revenue service, that we can therefore leave to one side and complete at a later date because they're not safety critical and they're not service critical. And that's a piece of work that's been ongoing for a period of time now. We're looking to finalise that and understand the cost benefit analysis of how and when to deliver that work. Real focus to support the SIDT, as Mark's already alluded to, and we're on track for that starting next week. I think generally in reasonably good shape, a lot to do. The Romford Control Centre sort of moving into more of a controlling phase from next week is a critical milestone for us. There's a lot of learning, steep learning curve to be undertaken there, but we'll work closely with MTR and Mark's team and the suppliers to ensure that we learn from that. I think the final point I'll make is a lot of focus on trial running. Obviously, actually, the thing I'm most focused on is trial operations, because that is when we will be operating the railway as if it was in revenue service. That is when we'll do a lot of scenario testing, our emergency procedure tests, our disruption procedure tests. That work is all being finalised in terms of pulling a schedule together, what that will look like. And that, for me, is the phase which is most critical for us to make sure that we start that when we're all comfortable it's safe and reliable to do so. So that's it for me, Heidi. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Mark. And thanks to the other Andy as well. Nelson's already got his hand up. Over to you, Nelson.
Thanks very much, Heidi, and thanks to both Andy and Mark for that, combined introduction to the subject. I know that Andy Byford make it quite clear the responsibility, and I'm really pleased that we have a complete joined-up thinking between TfL and the delivery team. What I was quite, keen about is the two additional capacity that's being brought into the team, which is the station completion expert and also the project control expert. I hope by bringing this additional candidate or skill expertise in, it will help us to look at what we're looking at on the station, because I do hear quite clearly from what Mark was saying that firing in the scene, we've got 8 more to bring in next year, and that's going to be absolutely critical. So 2 questions really is, are we looking through the Bond Street as something that is going to come in as part of this? Because I know Andy Balfour's finished project. Is Bond Street coming into the stream on this particular area? The other point which Andy Lloyd touched on is the alternative delivery model. Have we really crystallized that, or is that still very much in the early stage? And finally, really, is just looking about the issue about the system between Siemens and Bombardier. I wonder, I thought we have more or less, closure on that, Mark. Is there any further development on that, particularly on the reliability growth, or is that progress and business as usual?
Okay, so I suggest, if I may, Chair, I'll go first.
Andy, sorry, can I just interrupt you? I'm conscious I've got a number of hands up, and just in the interests of time, I might take all the questions together and then come back to appropriate people to answer them. So, Greg, if you go next.
Thanks, Heidi. Apologies for being late arriving at the meeting. I was also going to ask the question about Bond Street, actually, and I think I'm glad that Nelson's done that. Mark, implicit in what you seem to say is that the software issues that we were discussing in great depth 6 months ago have now been resolved fully. Could you just sort of update on that. And then there's a broader question that I was interested in, which is just really the sense of momentum, confidence, staff retention, talent retention. How's that going? Because it seems to me that you're in a peculiar situation, really, where on the one hand, there's massive momentum in terms of activity and operations. On the other hand, there's uncertainty in the wider climate. So how's that playing out for you?
Thanks, Greg. Sarah.
I wanted to ask a question of Mark, really, about the whether he feels there's any impact on productivity arising from the lack of an agreed financing package. I would say that I've been in touch with my Whitechapel project manager, and his concern is about the ability to extend contracts beyond the end of the year, and whether that's creating any turnover that we could avoid.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll take Anne as well.
Thanks, Heidi. A number of the issues that I wanted to raise have been raised, so I won't go over those again. On the blockade, though, on the 2 blockades, very encouraging what Mark is saying, and I think I heard some positive words about assurance arising from them. But could you give us an update about whether or not you've cracked the assurance paperwork issue arising from the blockades? Because we're not going to go further on without sorting that out. And also, in terms of Farringdon having got to SC3, could you sort of go over what the lessons learnt from that are that are now you're trying to plug into the other stations? Because I think it is an issue for us that we do learn the lessons as we go through these, so that we have an opportunity to start speeding up the other issues. I know some of this will be going through the T-12, but just getting to SC3, were there any innovations that you were able to do to crack some of the knotty problems that all the stations are dealing with? And can I pick up on the staff vacancy as well? Because I can see that, HS2 has been mentioned a couple of times, and I can see the attraction of that. Is there any way of us coming to some deal with HS2 about the timing of moves of staff to them, if we can sort out the funding issues so that we can retain them for our project, so that we come to some sort of collaboration? Because it strikes me that where these big infrastructure projects are working, we ought to be trying to have a sort of phased movement of staff from one to the other, rather than having 2 failed projects because we can't get the staff in at the right time to either of them. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. A lot there. Why don't I ask Andy B to kick off, and then bring people in as you see fit, Andy?
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, board members, committee members, for those questions. And so what I suggest we do is triage this. So I'll deal with Bond Street, if I may. Then, although Mark may wish to comment on that as well, but I'll deal with Bond Street. Then, Andy, if you can talk about the alternative model that Nelson asked about. Then, Mark, you've got the issues around the software problems, the blockade and the assurance paperwork, lessons learned from Farringdon. May I make a suggestion, Heidi, that we just hold the points around the impact of finance until we get to the finance section, because we're absolutely going to cover them there, right? What the impact has been of the lack of a deal. If you wouldn't mind, colleagues, just holding on those, we'll pick them up with Simon Killenback in the next item. Okay, so let's get into it. So Bond Street, Nelson, you asked about Bond Street. Well, the reason that we brought in the additional resource, this guy, I've described him as a world-class practitioner in finishing stations. And the reason I know that is because in a previous life, I inherited a subway extension that was in a bit of a similar situation, actually. 6 stations, 8.6 kilometers long, heading for a huge additional overrun. There'd already been an overrun on schedule. And I found out, it became clear that what was supposed to be a 2016 opening was being talked of as late 2018, possibly 2019. So in the end, we made a change. We brought in a separate company with a guarantee that we'd hit the end of 2017. We did. And two of the key people are the two people we've brought in to Crossrail. One of them was brought in specifically to sort out the tier 1 contractors, to identify critical path, to sort out the wheat from the chaff, because there's always lots of stuff that needs to be done, but some of it can just be done later. You've got to have a laser focus on what's critical and then do it in the right order, do it in a methodical order. So that's what this guy, Mike Dunham, brings to the party. And then the other was my project director in Toronto. And you know, I mentioned him earlier, and he's going to sort out the overall project controls and help Mark in that regard. So what I said to him, Mike Dunham, is Bond Street is job number 1 for you. Get Bond Street up to speed, rapidly up to speed. And while you're at it, sort out Whitechapel, and then equally look at the other stations and the order in which they're being done, which will pick up things like the lessons learned from Farringdon. But he's really good, Nelson, at what he does. You're an engineer, I'm not. I remember walking onto stations in Toronto and actually late 17 and saying to Mike, oh, we're not going to do it, are we? Because there's stuff everywhere. There's wires hanging out the ceilings. He'd say, absolutely, yes, we are. Absolutely, no question. He knows exactly what he's doing. So we brought him out of retirement. He'd retired, but we persuaded him one last big job, and he's really up for it. So he thinks it can be done, and to be honest, that's good enough for me. So let's go to Andy, if that gives you assurance, Nelson. Let's go to Andy on alternate model. Oh, the only final thing I'd say on Bond Street is, again, I'm pragmatic on this. Open means open, doesn't necessarily mean absolutely everything has to be finished. Let's be pragmatic. And the alternate model.
Thanks, Andy. So, Nelson, the principle of the ADM has been agreed. We've also been talking about it for a little time now. The focus has been on triaging out the elements of the work that would move into the ADM and move away from Crossrail. We haven't finalised that yet. I expect that to be done over the next short period of time, a few weeks, and then we can decide once we've got that, what is the right vehicle in terms of who, in terms of, you know, whether it's our own resource in terms of LU or TfL, or we arrange a specific contract to get that work delivered. So I expect that to be nailed certainly by early part of January at the latest. And we've also just got to assure ourselves that the financial rationale for doing it makes sense as well. But I expect that to be certainly all resolved well before the next meeting of this committee.
Okay, Mark.
Okay, can I just sorry, Mark. I'm just going to bring Catherine Cairns in here because I think she's got to leave shortly, and I think she wanted to make a point about make a comment about the HS2 point that Anne made. So, Catherine, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Heidi. I mean, I'm going to have to go shortly, but I'm certainly not making any promises. But I'm very happy to take that point back about HS2, and you know, other projects which may draw people off. To at least talk to the department about it and see if there's anything feasible there. And you know, it's certainly a point worth making. In fact, I think we've raised it already once. So I'll see where I get to.
Thanks, Catherine. That's really helpful. Mark.
I would say, you back to HS2, that Mark Thurston, myself, Jim Crawford, and Chris Rayner, and all the people in HS2, we have regular sessions, and we're clear on the resource issues. But we'll talk about it separately in the funding maybe. But the conduit between the programs exists and is quite active actually between us all. So, okay, Rachel, do you want to say anything on ADM? And Andy, is there anything from the Crossrail point of view, Rachel, you would like to comment on?
Thank you, Mark. I mean, only really to build on what Andy has said. So the volume of candidate items, potential movement of scope is rising as the triage works. I think it was about 600 items at the end of last period. There is some work in the detail to be completed, and as Andy described, decisions taken over what is the most cost-effective and appropriate route for the works to be completed. So it is underway. There's no, you know, everyone agrees the advantages. of the strategy, and it is accelerating in the rate at which we are agreeing and transferring.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. So topics for me were the blockade, the software, in particular Farringdon. So I won't add anything else to Bond Street. I think Andy's said enough on Bond Street. Obviously, we are in control of Bond Street now, and our productivity at Bond Street, by the way, for the past 4 weeks has been 95% at Bond Street. So we've turned a massive corner in Bond Street after the control of being taken away. So I'll leave it at that. Right. I would talk about blockade first. I assume committee members get the weekly report. Do you all get the weekly dashboard?
I get it, Mark, but I don't know whether other members get it. So I think people are shaking their heads. So I think perhaps we need to rectify.
We will send you all the exciting weekly dashboard of an acronym-filled Crossrail dashboard that you all love. But if you do look at it, Anne, it would reassure you that actually, I'm looking at it right now on my screen, the summer blockade EALs, I'm looking at right now, the summer blockade EALs are all now through EB. Now that's been a 10-week process, so it just shows you the enormity of it. But yeah, if you look at the dashboard from today, in the route where ACs burn down, you will see that we are pretty much through it. So a 10-week lag from what we do on site to actually putting it through the sausage machine is quite interesting. And a future lesson for Mark Thurston, I would say, about the agility of assurance processes. Mark. So I think we have connectivity and clean line of sight to what we do in site now ends up in Enterprise Bridge. And our technical director has done an amazing job, Colin, in making sure we have one source of truth in EB.
Mark, can I just say, sure. Remind you that there are people listening to this online who have previously attended Crossrail board meetings, and if we can sort of try and keep our use of acronyms for a minimum, it might just help people. I'm just thinking people might be wondering what EALs are, but so I just thought I'd mention that quickly.
No, you're right. You get trapped in this world, yeah. An EAL is an element outstanding works list, and it is the currency we use for work to go on Crossrail. Thank you, Heidi. That is a good aid memoir to me. Thank you very much. Software. To the point, whoever raised it, I think Greg raised it on the issues we had 6 months ago on software. I would say, I mean, I've been in railway signalling pretty much all my career, and the work that Howard and Jim have done with Siemens and Bombardier has been quite exceptional actually over this 2020 calendar year. The software problems that we had previously, not really problems, challenges and architectural issues, are pretty much resolved. We've got converged software, we know exactly where the issues are. We have the signalling system safe, it's relied upon, it's running on the real railway network rail. The issues for us now are somewhat different, Greg. They are in the rather complicated reliability growth. Now, people might be surprised about why are these things so complicated? Well, for a start, they are immensely complex systems, and they are the same safety integrity level you would have in airliners and nuclear power stations. So the gradual evolution of reliability growth is where we are. You would say we've got ourselves a foothold, and it's why we called our collaborative team a plateau. We are at a plateau of safety functionality. The question is now, how do we get it up to Six Sigma levels of reliability over the next short number of months, next 6 to 9 months, really, quite a lot of effort. And I agree with Andy Lord, we couldn't have better collaboration from our supply chain, but it remains one of the biggest challenges in railway signalling in the world to take our safe product to something that is highly reliable. And your reliability levels that people experience on the Jubilee and the Victoria line, and to get it up to that level is a real challenge, and we still have about 1,000 people working globally in about 10 different centres on the software. But I'm very confident about it. But it's a significant technical challenge that excites us, but it's ahead of us. On the Farringdon issue, what have we learned to get to SC3? I think what we've learned is that having worked really cleverly and smartly with the operators, who've done an excellent job actually to reduce their requirements to the minimum. Howard and Andy's team have just been brilliant to work with, and haven't really been pedantic or gold plating. The trick of Farringdon is, having got to that baseline of what the operator needs, we've really worked rigorously in the detail to give people what they want. As-built drawings, defect correction, all the thousands and thousands of things that are required to get SC3. The trick in Farringdon was they were very rigorous, and they simply were quite rigorous, that's the right word. And I think they've allowed themselves to enter a T-12 process, which simply means we've got 12 weeks to hook this station up. So the message that we're taking out of Farringdon is to the devil's in the detail, I suppose. And Farringdon provided the benchmark, the highest possible quality, not gold plating, just exactly what the operator needed. And I mean, Howard might want to comment on that, but as you always say, Howard, the devil is in the detail, and Farringdon simply just got their work done properly, and every other station now needs to get to that level. That's it, really. I think that's it. Apologies for the acronyms. I think that's it.
Thanks, Mark. I think Greg did ask a question about broader sort of confidence, and we picked up HS2 staff retention point, but given the...
I'll touch on it, but it's pertaining to... I won't go near the funding discussion, but I think, Greg, what you have now is a very, very challenging situation for everybody involved. We have all of our sites open with 2,500 people, highly productive and safe, but we've still got 2,000 people working virtually. And I think the sense of momentum we have is you've got a lot of people now doing the job that they love and want to do and have worked years to get to this point. I think the challenge for us is maintaining that momentum. And we're certainly finding in the virtual world, like everybody, it's quite challenging mentally to keep working at this pace. So we are actively thinking about how people pace themselves, asking people to take their holidays, have proper breaks. We're planning Christmas quite carefully to make sure people have as much of a break as they possibly can. I don't sense any detuning from that. We do have attritional issues in resourcing that are pertaining to funding. But as regards the sense of momentum you have, I think we are in a good position. But the challenge ahead is significant. And as the leader of the group, I suppose, with Andy Lord, I think we worry a little bit about, can we sustain the virtual world? And I think the mental effort involved is quite unprecedented, actually. And I'm very, very proud of the people who work for us. But they've undoubtedly got a big task ahead of them. And how we keep them safe mentally, Carol, is part of our safety improvement plan. We think as much now about mental well-being as we do about physical safety, and that's been a profound change in 2020.
Thanks, Mark. Andy Lord, did you want to come back in?
I was just going to mention, Heidi, and perhaps just as a reminder for everyone, particularly those who are new, is, and I don't pretend to know an awful lot about this because I'm a mechanical engineer by background rather than electrical or signalling engineer, but we are, opening a railway here that has to deal with 3 different signalling systems. Depending on which branch is operating. So if the train goes out to Heathrow from the east, it uses Network Rail in the east. It then uses the central tunnel system. Then it uses Network Rail in the west, and the Heathrow branch is on a different signalling system again. So yeah, it's very easy for us to talk about the software needs to be fixed, and it absolutely does. But we shouldn't underestimate the scale of the complexity and the challenge we've given our supply chain to fix this. And bear in mind, we want these transitions to happen automatically and safely between each section of the different parts of the railway. So I think it's just worth reminding everyone that this is not the case of software fix for one system. It's multiple systems controlling one train across different parts of infrastructure.
Thanks, Andy. I think that's a point well made. Okay, if there aren't any further comments or questions on the status update, then I suggest that we note that update and move on to item 6, which is the finance update. I think I'm going to ask Simon Killenbach and Rachel McLean to introduce this item. I'd just like to say, to start off with, that I think it was a positive development that we saw some reference in the paperwork associated with the CSR yesterday to the government financing Crossrail to its completion. Clearly the details of that haven't yet been concluded, and now the matter is extremely urgent. Just so that listeners are aware, and I said this in the TfL Finance Committee yesterday, the Mayor has written to the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary in the last week asking to speak to them personally, so that we can conclude these discussions, and short of us going and camping outside the Treasury to try and get this resolved. I'm not sure what more we could be doing to try and resolve it now. But perhaps with that, I'll just hand over to Simon to start off with, and then perhaps Simon can bring Rachel in. Simon.
Thanks, Heidi. And I think also just to welcome Matt Lodge, who's just joined in place of Catherine Kearns. Matt is the director responsible for rail in DfT, and along with myself has been involved over the last few years in the sponsorship of the Crossrail project as our joint sponsor. So welcome to Matt. I just wanted to recap very briefly over a couple of things before we get to where we are. So I think it's really important to remember that the original premise of Crossrail funding was that the Crossrail project would be financed a third by the users of the project through the fare box. That has paid for a couple of £1 billion of borrowing and the rolling stock and depot, and also it pays for the track access charges on the Network Rail parts of the line outside the central tunnel section. A third by London through two brand new taxation streams in terms of business rate supplement and mayoral sill, and then a third by government grant. And that was the agreement about how the project would be funded. It was anticipated at that time that the project would deliver some £42 billion of GVA, of which 100% of the tax take on that GVA accrues to the government beyond those business rate supplement and mayoral sill revenue streams. And since the original announcement of the delays to the project in September 2018, you'll recall that in December 2018 we announced with government the £2.15 billion of additional financing with the GLA and TfL, again borrowing against the future fare box and against the mayoral sill, which wasn't something that was able to be borrowed against before it was contributing to the project. In November 2019, we announced to the markets the need for a further 400 to 650 million of funding, and on the 21st of August this year, we announced the need that 400 to 650 million now looks more like 1.1 billion of additional funding. Since which time we've been working very closely with Matt and the joint sponsor team, who we work very well with Matt and the team. They are incredibly aligned with us in terms of wanting to see the project delivered, but nonetheless we have struggled to make inroads with the Treasury in terms of finding a solution to the funding. So back in September, as we were taking on the governance, if you would think about our funding like a car that's flashing empty with 30 miles to the go, we said we've got to get this sorted out. Where we are now is we're effectively running on vapour in the project, and Rachel and Mark are doing a good job to keep the plates spinning. The GLA have offered to borrow 825 million against the business rate supplement and the mayoral sill, but that requires some support from government because those funding streams are expected to be impacted by the economic impact of the virus. And that leaves 275 million of funding, which we have asked the Treasury to consider funding because London has no further revenue streams against which to borrow. And TfL's own revenue streams, as you know, have been clearly significantly impacted by the pandemic. We expect there to be a 20% permanent reduction in demand that it will take us until 2030 to get back to pre-pandemic levels. So there really is an offer there from London's government to borrow the maximum amount that it can to finance the project. And without putting Matt on the spot, I know he and the DfT sponsor team have been working hard in the last 24 hours to try and progress this for us. But Matt and I haven't had a chance to speak before this meeting. So I don't, as we currently stand, have an update on the status of the funding. Perhaps Matt does.
Thanks, Simon. I may ask Matt to comment in a minute. I did just want to pick up on the sort of question that Sarah asked under the last item and ask Rachel to comment on really what the reality of this uncertainty is within the project itself, what that does mean in terms of, productivity and the efficiency with which you are able to operate. I just wonder if you might say something on that first.
Yes, of course, Chair. So I think there's a few areas I would touch on to sort of illustrate the impacts of this uncertainty over the funding position. Sarah's question actually was in relation to people, and she mentioned one of the challenging areas that we're having to manage, which is the retention and recruitment of critical skills for completing the next phase, the crucial phase, running up to trial running and then trial ops. So to give you a sense of scale around that, Crossrail's what we call Team Crossrail, so these are not people working out on site. This is the group of project managers, commercial managers, health and safety, colleagues, engineers, etc., working on the programme. Those numbers are falling. They've been falling for each of the last 3 periods. 16 down last period, so that's net of recruitment. So that is, that will be driven by a number of factors, but certainly the fact that we're only able to commit to short extensions in people's period of employment on the contract is an issue. So that's the first place I wanted to talk about. It is absolutely correct that the momentum that Mark described is there, and the commitment of people to see the Elizabeth line into service is high, but nevertheless that is what the data is telling us, that there is some reduction, and also that people are really concerned about having to have repeated conversations about the funding position and about people's personal duration of employment with the programme. I also just wanted to highlight that almost all of the contracts are required to make forward commitments each varies, but on average between 4 weeks to 16 weeks out. The project managers are agreeing with the supply chain what scope will be delivered, what resources will be required on site, and that is obviously making future commitments. And we're now at the point where it's extremely difficult without the additional funding to continue to make those forward commitments. And then finally, there are some items of expenditure, of course, which really do go out quite a long way in time: software commitments, insurance, and so on. So that is a third area where we are, as Simon said, we have been spinning plates, but actually we're now in a position where that is, just not a sustainable position for us.
Thank you, Rachel. Matt, would you like to make a comment, recognising that what Simon said about the positive work that has taken place between TfL and DfT on this issue? I know that Treasury have had a lot on their plate this week with the CSR, but I wonder if you could give us an update from your perspective before I bring other committee members in.
Of course. I don't, as I sat here now, have a kind of silver bullet that solves the whole problem. I think there's an awful lot of work going on between our teams, both within the department, with TfL and within the GLA, to get to a resolution and solve the issues that we've got. I think we hear you. I think we understand the urgency, and my team were on a discussion with, I was on a discussion with Rachel at lunchtime today, being very clear about what the impacts are, how we're going to work, how we're going to get through this, etc. As I say, there's an awful lot of work going on. There's further discussions going on with colleagues of the Treasury this afternoon. There's been discussions this morning. I suspect there will be discussions all day tomorrow as well. So yeah, it's on air. We're doing what we can, and we are working hard to resolve it. As I say, as I'm sat here now, I haven't got a silver bullet that solves it, but we're doing what we can to progress it.
Thank you, Matt. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I think Andy B, the last time we had a big discussion on this subject, I remember clearly the comment that came from you was that the Crossrail financing and also the detail to do with TfL will be a conversation to be had directly with the government, and the two will be running in parallel. Obviously, the TfL side has gone through, and I'm a bit frustrated or disappointed that the Crossrail bit is being secondary. My concern, and I think the concern of this committee, is effectively we need to understand what is the worst possible scenario if we are unable to close out on an agreement on this, because I do know that the point that Rachel talks about, which is really commitment of people, the supply chain, and the ability to actually commit to forward plan is very, very critical. And if we are unable to make that sort of commitment, what does it mean in terms of the project? I hear the word mothballing, which is not the last thing we want to do. And I just wonder, what effectively we can do to convince the government as quickly as possible to make a decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. I'm going to take everyone that's got their hand up and then come back to Andy and Simon for comment. So Mark next, and then Anne. Mark.
Thank you, Heidi. I think, as Simon very helpfully did for the board when we were discussing the TfL funding situation, it would be helpful if you could outline the timeline really about the sort of formal process we need to go through if we don't secure funding by a particular point in time and decisions need to be made. So I think giving an overview of that horizon would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Anne?
Thanks. It's a comment really. I just think it's really very disappointing that this issue in broadly the scale talked about was actually identified nearly a year ago, and we are still trying to resolve it. I understand all the issues, and I'm really glad to hear about the good working relationship with DfT over this. But we did sort of move the governance in good faith over to TfL, and I'm the first to say that I've been saying for ages we should do it. So I'm really glad we did. But TfL is not in a position to fund this project, and that was clear when the package was being sorted out for TfL for this half year. So to disentangle these two things and not deal with this is actually potentially putting TfL in trouble again. So I do hope that we can get a resolution very, very quickly, because we must be on the cusp. I sympathise totally with Rachel in that she has been having to move approvals around projects in order to keep the thing going, but she's been doing it now for a couple of months, and as Simon said, we're operating on vapour here. If we really want to move this project forward, then we need to be having certainty on funding. And to have got to this point where we're almost we are at the point where we've got the decision making sorting out so that we can really move rapidly on this. To be thwarted by the funding is really very disappointing. So I do hope that given that it was mentioned in the paperwork yesterday on the spending review, that will open the door to officials and ministers sorting this out with the Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I don't know whether Andy B or Simon wants to say anything. I can see Andy B nodding. So Andy, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'm just going to do the opener, and then Simon will kick in with Rachel as he sees fit. So I think Anne said three key words: in good faith. This was transferred in good faith, and throughout the H2 funding discussions, and we get that absolutely, we get that the government has a lot on its plate, because it does. You know, the COVID virus has really hit the whole country, so there's a hell of a lot to get through, and we totally understand that. At the time, we were okay with uncoupling the two, because to do H2 and Crossrail at exactly the same time probably was a bridge too far, and we were okay with that, because we said, you know, as long as it follows shortly thereafter, then we're fine. But when that's now 4 weeks ago, we settled the H2 deal on the 31st of October. It's now nearly 4 weeks. And what really worries me is it's not actually really 4 weeks. We actually started the discussions about this months ago. And to the credit of Matt and his colleagues and Simon and our team, we put together heads of terms, and the GLA came up with 825 million out of the required 1.1 billion. I think that's pretty impressive. That's the lion's share. You know, that's, as the mayor described it, the deal of the century. So, you know, at the very least, we must get the 825 backstop with letters of assurance. We must get that done. And it is frustrating because under Mark's leadership and Andy's, we've really got the project motoring now in terms of galvanizing everyone, firing up. Everyone's focused on the end result, as I said earlier. You know, we've set ourselves some internal stretch targets. On our side, we're doing everything possible, and yet we cannot seem to break through this impasse of this triangular relationship between TfL, DfT, and HMT, the Treasury. So, as Mark rightly said, Simon, sorry, we're running on vapours. We must get this done now. We have no further time to waste. So, Simon, just give some further examples of what this actually means, please.
Thanks, Andy. So, TfL board members will recall when we were faced with the prospect of TfL effectively being no longer a going concern unless we received the emergency funding both in May and then on the 31st of October. In a normal pre-COVID world, the Crossrail funding crisis was also an existential crisis for TfL. We had no further ability to borrow. We had no ability, given that the majority of our capital projects are fully contractually committed because we're coming to the end of a 20-year investment cycle, to be able to pull any levers to raise anything like £1 billion. We are unable to fund Crossrail, quite frankly, if we can't get a deal done. So, you know, it is as stark as that. We don't have room in our funding agreements to keep Crossrail going absent a funding deal. We have asked, as one of the fallback options in one of the letters that Andy has written to his peers in DfT and in HM Treasury, that we need assurance that the deal is going to get done. And if we can't get assurance that the deal is going to get done in very short order, then we need government to help cash flow the project whilst this is resolved. And I'm afraid it's just as stark as that.
Thank you, Simon. Has anyone else got anything that they want to say about it at this stage? Mark?
So I think it would be helpful to understand what the real timeline is for this. You know, how urgent are we talking, days or the next 2 or 3 weeks?
Mark, do you want to respond to that, or is Simon?
Well,
Mark, you go.
I'll talk programmatically. I would talk programmatically, then Simon and Rachel would talk monetarily. It's days, Mark. We every day on this program counts, and we're in the matter of days. We do not have weeks here. We've got days. But I'm sure Rachel and Simon would have a more accurate financial reason for that, but it needs resolution now. I mean, and it isn't crying wolf, by the way. We are at full tilt on this program, and any delay now will impact this program.
Yes, so I think Rachel can confirm, but the investment authority was fully utilised earlier in November, and Rachel wrote to me asking if that you have an immediate need to increase investment authority by about 80 million as a round number for this period alone, in order just to keep the most critical activity going. Investment authority is different to cash, and we have a crisis with both. So the pre-existing funding agreement has loans that can continue to be drawn down for a few months yet to continue to pay the bills that have already been incurred. But in drawing down loans to pay for a project, I can only do that as the CFO in a prudent way if I know the project can be financed through to completion. We would not take on more debt with no prospect of being able to finish the project at this stage. And that is a cash issue as opposed to a commitment issue. So, we really are in days rather than weeks. And again, as Mark said, for anybody who thinks this is hyperbole or bluffing, it isn't. That's why we raised back in August and September the need to grip this and to get on with it. We are on vapor. This has to be sorted out.
Anne and then Nelson, and then I'll conclude this item. And then Sarah, sorry, Anne, Nelson, Sarah. Anne.
Thanks. I was just going to really make a comment about the longer term, because clearly we don't want to mothball and we need to move this forward. But I don't think any of us should forget that actually getting Crossrail up and running as quickly as possible is part of the long-term financial stability for TfL. So every day this is delayed, and remember, in terms of the fare box, if I remember correctly, Simon, that really only kicks in for TfL when we get stages 4 and 5 in, and actually, if we start missing Network Rail time slots for those, it's a 6 months gap at every sort of missing link. So the idea that we're not sorting this out ASAP and getting this up and running ASAP is a massive waste of money in terms of value for money terms for London and indeed the government. So I would hope that, as I say, particularly given the comments that are in, I understand, the paperwork, at least yesterday, from the spending review, that we can resolve this quickly.
So you're absolutely right, Anne. We have all the incentive we need to get the project open as soon as possible. There is no sustainability plan for TfL without a functioning Elizabeth line and the revenues that it's due to bring. We need no more incentive than that to get the project done. But the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, is about this is London, this only benefits London and London must pay. But there is no recognition that London does not have the levers to pay any more than it's offering to pay.
But equally, I would say that this train runs outside London, so surrounding areas are getting benefit from it as well.
Absolutely.
Nelson, then Sarah.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try and make this as brief as possible. Mark asked a question. I don't believe we did answer the question. Whilst we're working to try and find a resolution and the direction of travel seems positive, what is the worst scenario that will happen if we cannot close out? Because what I hear from Simon Killenberg is we are running out of the right to make decision. And if we don't, we have contractual obligations and various commitments. What is the likely scenario if we don't secure within the next few days? Perhaps to Rachel or Simon Killenberg. Thank you.
Nelson, it's just, we've got to be slightly careful here because the government have said in the spending review that they will finance this. So I don't really want to say any more than I have said. We have a responsibility to the suppliers and the people who work for Crossrail that this should get resolved. Whatever politics are holding this up should get resolved, and we should get on with this. It's in everybody's interest to do so. But if there is no way of funding the project, then we will have to stop work on the project. I'll be legally obliged to consider the Section 114 process that we fought so hard to avoid for TfL, because it is of that order of magnitude. And ultimately, you'd be looking at the going concern nature of Crossrail Limited. So nobody wants to get there, I would hope.
Sarah.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, really, but at present we're giving people 4 or 5 weeks visibility in their contracts with Crossrail, and we are at the assurance stage where continuity is really important, and having the person who knows continuing in employment with us could save us weeks. So I think there's a real risk of delay on this project because some key people just take up another offer elsewhere where they do have some certainty. And 4 or 5 weeks isn't very long for people to plan around their mortgages and other commitments.
Thanks, Sarah. Andy.
All I'll say, final point, I know we need to move on, is for the assurance of board members, committee members, it's the same as H2. We'll stay up all night. We'll do 24/7 negotiations. We're available anytime you want. We are determined to get this thing across the line, whatever it takes. Matt, again, we appreciate you and Bernadette's help on this, and the Secretary of State's. We just have to find the solution. So rest assured, it's priority number one.
Thanks, Andy. I think to wrap this item up, I would just like to say, I'm trying to remain calm about this, but I'm frankly absolutely raging about it. The government has said that it wants London to pay. There's a proposal on the table whereby the GLA would borrow £825 million against MSIL and business rate supplement. The government need to find a way to enable that borrowing to happen, so the money can start to flow into Crossrail. So the things that need to be signed off in the next couple of days to enable work to progress, so that all of that can happen. And if we don't find a way of sorting this out within the next 48 hours, then there will be delays. There'll be a massive hiatus. Those delays will cost money. It will cost government more money. And I can't think that any reasonable person would want that to come to pass. And so, I say what I said at the beginning of this item. The Mayor has written to the Chancellor. The Mayor has written to the Chief Secretary. We've said we want to talk about this to find a way forward. And I think it would be a huge failure if we were to get to a point where we couldn't find a way forward, having done so much and the project having come so far, to now get this over the line. So I don't think we should continue this discussion anymore. We are where we are, but it does now need to be resolved. We literally have come to the end of the line with it. So I'm going to move us on to the next item on the agenda. It's the Elizabeth Line readiness update. Andy, did you want to introduce this item 7? Andy Lord, I think.
Heidi, I think we covered that as part of the update with Mark.
Yeah, I think, I just didn't know whether there was anything else you wanted to say that we didn't cover.
No, thanks.
Okay, item 8 is the Programme Partner Incentive Scheme. I think Mark is going to present this item.
Just clarify, Heidi, what are some of this is for a separate section in the private section, I think, because there are some commercially sensitive matters. What are just remind me what we are going to do with this.
Well, I don't know whether you just want to say in general what this item is about. We will then proceed at the end of the agenda to move into part 2 once we've dealt with all of the items on part 1. Because there are some matters of a commercial sensitivity around the supplementary information, perhaps you might just say now broadly what this relates to. We'll pick up the commercially sensitive issues in part 2, and then I will reopen part 1 of the meeting so that we can take a decision.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. The programme partner, called the PP, were appointed in 2012. They were part of a support system for Crossrail, intrinsic part of it actually, and they provided, it was a joint venture of 3 different companies, and they provided project management and programming services to the programme, and still do. They're still a valued part of the effort to get the Elizabeth Line open. That contract, which started in 2012, had, of course, a series of commercial issues and commercial incentives associated with it. The commercially sensitive matter to this is we would like to agree the revision to some of those incentives. Now we have a re-baselined programme. So it's really to wash up the incentives for the programme partner that were earned in the period up to 2018. And that is what this topic is about. But it's probably appropriate to talk about the detail in the private section.
Okay, unless anyone has got any comments or questions that they wanted to make in part one. Susan, I think you've got your hand up.
I do. I just wanted to clarify, they've been appointed since 2009 rather than 2012.
Thanks, Susan.
Well done, Susan. Well done. I'm glad you're there. 2009. Well done. Thank you.
Okay, so we won't take a decision on this now. We'll have a discussion in part two, and then I'll reopen the meeting and we can take a decision on that item once we've had the part two discussion. All right, so moving on to item 9 on the agenda. This is the reports of the project representative. We will be joined by the PREP in part 2 of this meeting for a fuller discussion. Members of the public will be aware that there are redacted versions of the PREP reports and indeed the Crossrail response to the PREP reports on the TfL website. We have got quite a bumper pack of PREP reports that are attached to the paperwork for this meeting, and that's because they go back, I think it probably is to period 2, so we've got period 2 through to period 6. I am aware that all of those PREP reports were shared with the Crossrail board. The reason why they're all coming here is because the PREP reports were normally published with the papers for the Programme and Investment Committee, and just due to the cycle of meetings, they hadn't been published, and so that's why we've got so many here. But we might want to focus our discussion both in part 1 and part 2 on the last report. I also think that prior to this meeting, the period 7 report was circulated as well. So we may wish to pick up on that. So Mark, I don't know whether you want to introduce this item.
Is the PREP not here, Heidi? I just can't see that PREP will join us in the part B, I take it.
That's what I was told, that the PREP had specifically asked to take questions in the part 2. I could be wrong about that. Perhaps Howard Carter could give me some guidance.
No, that's correct, Heidi, yes.
So I would, thank you, just checking that, because the PREP, the project representative, is closely linked to our programme, of course, scrutinises our programme on behalf of sponsors. They have access all areas into our programme. Their record, their report is a periodic report. The latest one is P7, which is actually 6 weeks ago. The period 8 report is due next week. So the latest report you have is about 6 weeks old. So read it in that context. And I would say it's an accurate representation of the project representative's view. We clearly don't agree with everything in it, but equally I would say the sentiments in there are aligned with what we think the challenges of the programme are. And as you say, Heidi, there's quite a deck of them, but maybe we should focus on period 7, which again, I stress, ended about 6 weeks ago. But I think it might be better to let the PREP themselves speak in part B for their own concerns, but whatever you want to talk about now, we can.
Okay, thanks. I mean, there are some items which do have commercial sensitivities, but I think there are some items that we can discuss in part 1, and I think it would be appropriate to discuss in part 1. Some of the issues that the PREP has picked up in their reports have actually already been covered in some of the discussion that we've had as part of the project status update, particularly around resourcing. They do talk about resourcing gaps. They talk also, and I think I'd be interested in your comments on this in this part of the agenda, the need to have sort of baseline scope set out for station works against which progress can be tracked. And I'd be interested to know how things are going with that. They talk about a change management process needing to be put in place as well. Those were, I think, some of the specific questions that they raised in the period 6 PREP report, which is the one that has been published alongside the paperwork for this meeting, and so I think you provided a response to that in the second week of November, and that's also set out in the paperwork, but would be good to get some assurance on some of those issues. Andy Beer, did you want to come in here?
Well, actually, great minds think alike, I guess, because without having seen that report, we had already initiated, number one, the two people I talked about. Number one, the stations guy who is there to deal with the first of those two issues, the one about the assurance around finishing off stations and the completion items. And the second person to whom I referred earlier is there to deal with things like change control, change management, project controls, because we identified very early on that was still a weakness. So I'm confident that we've addressed both of those issues, even without them being flagged. In some ways, it's a good thing that the PREP also flagged them. The two things effectively happened in tandem. We identified weaknesses and they've been addressed.
Thanks, Andy. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely.
Sorry, Mark Phillips.
Sorry.
Thank you, Heidi. I think we've gained a lot of assurance actually from the discussion today. I would say a lot of it's come out from the verbal discussion that we've had, and I wondered whether there's an opportunity to align the management update report to some of the issues that occur in the PREP, such that at least we get answers to that when we're preparing for the meeting, because I think there was quite a difference in the paperwork between the PREP report and the management status in terms of questions not answered or left hanging. And I think there would be probably benefit in having a little bit more succinct PREP report. We'll come to that perhaps when we meet the person later. But I think it would be really helpful for the management response to incorporate at least answering some of the key issues that are identified by the PREP, because that gives us as a board assurance that those things have been looked at and have been addressed, or in fact they may not be relevant. They may be dismissed because of X, Y, Z, and I think it's helpful to understand that.
I think that's a fair comment. Mark Phillips and Mark W may want to respond to that. Can I just take Anne and then I'll come back to Mark W.
Thanks, Heidi. Picking up partly what Mark was saying, I think it would actually be quite helpful. I'm pleased that there's talk about the dashboard coming to members of the committee, but actually it would be quite good to have some sort of performance matrix or dashboard that could come to the open part of the agenda to actually look at in terms of what's happening against what's been said by the PREP report. But also the PREP report does talk about the interdependencies, and I was going to pick this up under the risk issue, but I'll mention it now, and to get something from Mark either here or under the risk side about how we're coping with and dealing with those interdependencies, both with other players in the game, but also within the programme overall. So I'd like some comment on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Mark W.
Yeah, sure. So on our response to PREP, we've tried to improve it, but I'll take that on board. We maybe should sharpen it up. I think you're right, Mark and Anne. We probably should sharpen it up a bit tighter than it is. But I will take that away and on board, and I think it should be part of this meeting that we discuss it. The 4 things I've written down that are specific, I do agree with Andy Byford. Having specialist resource comes in does address one thing about station scope and change management. In parallel in the programme, 2 things have happened really since that report was written. We've taken the blockade method to stations now, starting with Farringdon, Paddington, Tottenham Court Road. So by bringing the blockade method, one of the key things about the blockade is, of course, we stabilise the scope. We are not complete there. We still have challenges at 1 or 2 of the stations, but generally the station's scope stability is a lot greater. Still more to do, and I'm sure Mike Dunham, our new stations lead, will take that on board. But I think we've done pretty well, and we have a method now. And the reason we get 80–90% productivity at Farringdon and at Tottenham Court Road these days is because we've stabilised the scope. Still more to do. And of course, as we continue to test, it brings us to our next topic of change control. Rachel and myself have actually put in place with Jim Crawford a brand new change control process, which is pretty much aligned to what TfL are doing, I think, I won't use an acronym, I've heard an acronym called the FCOG process, which I think is a tighter change control and delegation process, and we've tried very much to mirror that, and fundamentally that is the minimization of change. So that's quite a big initiative, actually, an improvement over the past 2 weeks that I think PREP will comment on in their next report, so kind of watch out for that. In terms of the dependencies, particularly what they refer to here, are specifically dependencies that are coming out of Crossrail safety assurance. So I said earlier that we've now actually achieved our safety assurance endorsed for the central operating section, big milestone for Crossrail, but there are several hundred dependencies, things that say that this is true, this is safe, if that action is complete. And it's either a piece of paperwork, it's a certificate to do, it might actually be more physical work and testing to do as well. So the management of dependencies, I mean, Andy Lord, myself, Howard and Jim, this is probably our hottest topic. And when we talk about can RFL get their operating safety case together, really the responsibility is really on Crossrail Limited to minimize the dependencies, i.e. get all the work done that they can do. There will still be dependencies outstanding. Some things can't be done until you get into revenue service, for example. So you have to have a project management process. And again, we look forward to the PREP critiquing how we've done on that. Our technical director has done actually an excellent job on baselining dependencies in our safety assurance. Mark, have I answered your question? Did you have anything else, Mark? Did I answer that comprehensively enough, or is there anything that I've missed there, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. I think there's perhaps two slightly different issues that we're talking about here. So there's following on from Mark's question, Mark Phillips's question, there's the question about you've got the Crossrail response to the PREP reports that are published and are on the TfL website. Then you've got the management reports that are produced for the East London Line Committee, the Elizabeth Line Committee. There's a Freudian slip there. I think what we need to do is find a way of ensuring that the sort of status updates, for example, that we discussed earlier, are actually picking up on and responding to the latest PREP reports. So it's not just the actual Crossrail response to the PREP that you've been used to doing, but it's the way in which we can actually, see a thread from what the PREP is saying through to what is being said in the substantive papers on the Elizabeth Line Committee agenda. And I think this is the first meeting, and so we sort of need to work through that. But I think that's something we should take away and consider. I think it would also be good to get to the point where we can publish in redacted form the latest PREP report, because we're having a discussion here today when the papers that have gone out are about the period 6 PREP report, yet we've all been circulated the period 7 PREP report. So having some alignment, that would be helpful, I think. And then I think the third issue we need to take away and consider is this point that Anne makes about the performance data and metrics that we can see at this committee to track progress against the tasks that actually still need to be done, so that when we come together again, at the end of January for our next meeting, and then again in March, we can start to see the extent to which you are on the trajectory to get into trial running, to get into trial operations, to get into passenger service. And at the moment, I think that, this is the first meeting, and so it's always going to be an iterative process. But if we can perhaps take that away and think about the sort of data that might be useful for this committee, I think that would be really helpful. Okay, right. So I think we'll note the the PREP report and return to it in the part 2 discussion. Item 10, we've got the TfL audit and assurance update. I think I'm coming to Howard and Clive to introduce this item. Howard.
Yes, Chair, I'll kick off if I may, and then if there are any detailed questions, particularly on the audit plan, I may ask Clive to help me with that. The purpose of this paper is to give you an overview of the assurance arrangements following the transition of the project into TfL, and in particular to explain how the generally applied 3 lines of assurance model will work going forward. We're hugely assisted in making sure this is a smooth transition by the fact that TfL internal audit were already providing internal audit services to Crossrail under a shared services arrangement. So there's complete continuity there, and that will carry on. We've also set out in the paper what the current audit plan is and what the current priorities are, so that you can see where that stands, and obviously that's open to members to comment on that if there's any tweak that you'd like to see to that. The real goal here, though, is to do as we do in TfL and as Crossrail, I believe, was previously doing, is to have an integrated assurance plan that demonstrates all the tiers of insurance, particularly to set out how the second line of assurance work, which is undertaken in Crossrail, how that will be integrated, and just to show a plan for the whole thing. We haven't, just in the time that we've had since the transition, quite got to that, although that is definitely a work in progress. Those discussions are going on, and we will bring that integrated plan to you for the next meeting. The one thing that we have identified is that TfL, as part of its third line of assurance, uses IIPAG, who are a group of independently appointed members who provide project assurance to TfL in the form of project reports and systemic issue reports. That's a process that served TfL quite well over the last few years, and our belief is that it would be really helpful at this point to extend the remit of IIPAG. IIPAG has always historically not been a part of Crossrail because the arrangements were separate, but we believe that on transition it would be appropriate to have IIPAG also involved with Crossrail, and some detailed discussions have already been held at kind of working level as to what IIPAG could do and how that would work. So the paper asks you to approve the extension of the IIPAG governance arrangements into Crossrail, in addition to TfL's other capital project spending areas that it currently now covers. So that's all I was going to say by way of an introduction. Perhaps open to any questions, and then particularly if there's anything on the audit plan itself, Clive would come in on that.
Okay, thanks, Howard. I can see Nelson has his hand up. Nelson.
Yeah, thanks very much, Heidi. I'm very supportive of this initiative. I think it's the right direction to go. But I want to pick on section 6.2, which talks about, the need to revisit the terms of reference of the IIPAG, and also the need to urgently have the right resources, particularly the area of expertise where Crossrail is at, to make sure we can have those expertise available to IIPAG so that they can support the Crossrail. So I'm very much in favor of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. Anne.
Thank you. Like Nelson, I'm very supportive of this proposal in terms of IIPAG. I do, however, think that this committee needs to have more visibility of what's happening at level 2 in terms of assurance within Crossrail and the Elizabeth line. And I think we need to work with Rachel in terms of what reports could come up here in terms of what's happening at level 2. I think pretty much the same way as PIC would normally get level 2 information going up to them on the rest of the TfL investment programme. That resource is there and have been working very closely with internal audit over the last few years. I think it would be beneficial for us to see some of the work that they do in terms of supporting the programme. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Howard, Clive, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I just to say, yeah, we completely agree that, and I think there's been discussions already with Rachel and her team about how we would give visibility to the second line of assurance going forward. And so my intention is that for the next meeting, we would have an integrated assurance report that gives you visibility of all of the assurance activity, an overview of it all, and that would include, as well as the internal audit work, any work IPAG do, and the second line of assurance. And we'd get in the same position as we are with TfL's capital expenditure programme, as we do for PIC, which I think is the arrangement. I think what I'm hearing, that everybody wants us to move to that same arrangement, and that is very much the intention. But Rachel, you may want to see, Rachel's got her hand up, so she may want to comment on that.
Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. So just to really just agree with what Howard, you covered most of what I was going to say. I think we are taking the opportunity to both streamline and integrate what we're doing around assurance. So as has already been mentioned, there are good engagements around agreeing the internal audit plan and also connecting the internal audit work with the LOD 2. So the reporting as designed in the transition is already flowing to the Elizabeth Line Delivery Group. So LOD 2 attends and presents there. And there's certainly no difficulty in integrating that into reporting to this committee, as has been suggested.
Thanks, Rachel. Anne, did you want to come back? You still got your hand up. I'm not sure whether that was a legacy hand. Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll continue those discussions and make sure that there's some way of giving visibility to this committee around the LOD 2 work, and we can hopefully pick that up in January at our next meeting. Okay, if members are agreed, then we'll note the paper on audit insurance and move on to item 12, which is the enterprise risk update opening of the Elizabeth line. I think this is going to be Mark W. and Andy Lord, is that right?
Yes, although Rachel's probably the best person to speak from a Crossrail point of view, being accountable for all of our assurance activities. But I mean, I'll introduce it if you want. We have a comprehensive set of risks now between Andy L and myself. It was always a topic on Crossrail board, actually. Two things the Crossrail board always encouraged. Number one, Mark Wilde and Andy Lord work closer together. I think we can demonstrate we're doing that. And the other thing that Joe Valentine would always talk about is there a set of joint risks. And I think we have actually got a very, very comprehensive suite of risks now, and people can see it shared between us. I think Rachel would agree there's more work to do to crystallise this and boil this down into something that this committee could have a conversation about. I'm sure Rachel would want to comment on that. Anything else from you, Andy, in terms of the risk?
I think the other thing, just to add, and Howard would probably have to correct me on this used to sit as a single TfL risk. We're obviously now combining it into one complete risk. What Mark was saying around the two of us working together. So, yeah, hopefully we've covered a number of the risks off in our earlier updates. But we're happy to have a more detailed conversation at a future meeting. But nothing else to add. Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you.
Maybe Rachel. It would be useful to know, Rachel, I know you have plans to refine this and take it to the next level. Do you want to just make a few observations about where this might head to in the future to make this more of a useful document at this level? What do you think?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So work was already underway, actually, in recent periods under Mark and Andy Lord's leadership to generate shared risk registers. And as Mark has noted, that was very much encouraged by the Crossrail board. So I think what this report produces is a set of individual, organisational and then shared risks. We, in parallel with doing that work, developed something called the Elizabeth Line Risk Landscape, which actually also went outside the TfL organisation to consider issues that maybe Network Rail or MTR might have to raise. So that is what we would like to bring together with this work so that we can bring to this committee a real landscape around risk and identifying those things which are shared, recognised as shared and being mitigated collectively versus key issues and risks which are relevant to just one of the organisations. So as Mark has indicated, this report is based on an enterprise risk for TfL. There were separate risk reports from within Crossrail, and what we would like to bring forward to the next meeting of this committee is that integrated product and that more strategic overview of risk.
Thanks, Rachel. Mark Phillips.
Thanks, Heidi. If I'm honest, this paper didn't really do much for me, to speak frankly. And I think from my experience with this type of topic, there's a great opportunity to make this overly complex for what boards need. If I might suggest, I think we just need a very simple dashboard. Tell us what the top 6 or 7 risks are for this project. What's the unmitigated position? What are the mitigations? What's the post-mitigation position? And what's the residual risk? I think that's what we need to know so that we can then ask the right questions about, well, are the mitigations sufficient? And what more can we do to help you overcome those? And I think this is a bit overly complicated and it doesn't really inform me, if I'm honest. Thank you.
Mark, if I may, just on that one, this is not the way Rachel would do it. This is a format that TfL risk reporting takes. So I'm sure, as Rachel's outlined, we can't accuse Rachel of overcomplicating this. She's been made to fill in the TfL format here. And I'm sure she'll take on board the comments and come back with that risk landscape as you've described.
Thanks, Simon. Anne?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what Rachel is talking about in terms of the risk landscape is probably more in tune with what Mark is talking about and is the issue that I was going to raise, which is that actually I think we need to think of this more as a programme risk rather than an enterprise risk and really focus on what needs to be done across the programme in order to get it sorted out. So I would agree with Mark, but I think we're trying to put a programme into a different sort of template to the one that's used by the rest of TfL. Yeah,
I think Rachel basically said this is work in progress and that, when we come back together again for our next meeting, it may have a slightly different sort of look and feel to it, which provides us with the sort of information that is most useful to us. Okay, all right. I don't think I've got anyone else that wants to come in on this unless I'm not managing my... Mark, did you want to say something else, Mark W? Or is your...
Well, it might be in the next topic, but I actually think before we pause on that, the way I conceptually feel is that ELDG is getting to be quite productive, will be productive in the intervention space, interventions. I think this committee is really interested in risk. And this committee's business is probably a lot to do with risk management. So, for example, there is a risk that we will not get the appropriate reliability standard from our software vendors. There is loads of work going on in that area, but it's not visible. That's what I think this committee really wants to see. Are we managing the risk envelope to pull us to the deterministic schedule? I think that's quite an important action for us to take away to try and make it coherent for the next time we meet, I think.
Okay. We'll make sure that happens and hopefully have a bit more of a sort of fruitful and productive discussion next time on the basis of the information that you bring to us. Okay, so moving on to item 12, member suggestions for future discussion items. Has anyone got anything burning that they want to raise now, or perhaps alternatively drop Howard an email with it?
And Chair, I might just say, obviously we'll capture all the actions and the suggestions for how we tailor this agenda and the papers for next time. This is just an opportunity for anybody to mention anything else that we haven't sort of mentioned so far in the meeting. And obviously this forward agenda isn't very heavily populated because we're just kind of feeling our way and getting into our stride with this committee.
Okay, well, if anyone has got any thoughts on that come to you in the next couple of days or weeks, I think get in touch with Howard, but I don't see anyone immediately raising their virtual hand at the moment. So moving on quickly to item 13, I'm not aware of any other business. Does anyone have any other business that they want to raise? I don't think so. Okay, so the date of the next meeting, 29th of January next year, 9:30 in the morning. I will bring this part of the meeting to a conclusion now and ask committee members to agree to exclude the press and public so we can move into the part 2 of the agenda. I'd just like to thank everyone for their contributions in this part of the meeting. And also to thank anyone who has joined us online. I will ask the guys who are in charge of the live stream to stop it now, and we will see everyone next time. So I will just pause for a couple of seconds to enable that to happen. Okay, so welcome back to the Elizabeth Line Committee. Apologies if there was any interference from my computer then making slightly strange noises at me, but hopefully you haven't heard that. If you were following the deliberations earlier, you would have heard that we finished the discussion on part 1 of the agenda. We went into part 2 to talk about 2 items. We have had some discussion on the PREP reports, and we've also talked about the item concerning the programme partner incentive scheme. We're aware that the Crossrail board discussed the programme partner incentive scheme back in March, and that under the previous arrangements it required sponsor sign-off. Given the transition of governance that now falls to TfL, committee members did talk about the fact that they would just like a little bit more information provided to them about the recommendations that were set out in the paper regarding the incentive scheme. And so we won't be taking a decision on this item today. There will be a revised paper that's circulated to committee members, and it's proposed that a decision is taken under Chair's action. And that would then be subsequently reported to a future meeting of this committee. And so unless any of my colleagues on the board have got anything that they would like to add at this stage, and I'm just looking around, I can't see any hands up. I think what I will do now is just thank people for their contributions once again, and thank the listeners who have tuned in online to listen, and that we will see you again when we come together for our next meeting in January. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye.